So, Life on the Edge is a project. It's sort of run by the lead partner is South Devon National Landscape, and it's sort of run in conjunction with Bug Life, and it's funded largely by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. But it is also got a lot of other partners, loads of other partners. So the main delivery partners would also include Torbay Coast and Countryside Trust, the Southwest Coast Path Association, and the National Trust, as well as our main cultural partners, Doorstep Arts. And funding comes from many sources, largely the National Lottery Heritage Fund, but also Devon Environment Foundation, Milky Wire, the Fat Face Foundation, and a couple of other smaller charitable foundations. We have many other sort of supporting partners that we work with, including the Devon Wildlife Trust, Plant Life, Moor Meadows, countless others. Here's the project area that is covered. We have 5 project hotspots. There's Wembury, the Estuary, Bolthead to Bolt Tail, Poole Point to Start Point, and Brownstone to Berry Head. The hotspots cover a total area of about 3,960 hectares. And you think about 1 hectare is about 1.5 football pitches. So that is, really quite a sizable area. And that's where we're going to doing our targeted conservation effort. But within the coastal beeline, we're also able to advise on agri-environment schemes and provide conservation grants of up to £5,000, and that's the coastal beeline. Goes 3 kilometres inland from the coast, anywhere between Wembury and Berry Head, and so that's sort of the broad sweeping area of the project. The main sort of focus of the project as a whole is our 30 rare and threatened species of invertebrates, which we're going to be talking about tonight, particularly the 11 bees and 2 wasps. But there are also 5 flies, 4 beetles, 3 moths, 2 butterflies, 2 crickets, and a spider. Our sort of secondary goal is to cover 30 species of threatened plants, and these group of species are largely focused around species-rich grassland habitat. So the protection and conservation of that habitat in particular will benefit the large swathe of different species. So for many of these species in particular, they're quite special to Devon, and Devon might be a sort of one of the only places the species is found, such as the 6-banded nomad bee, which is only found around Poole Point, and or it could just be a national stronghold of the species. So what we sort of as a project doing for these species, there's direct delivery of habitat restoration and creation. We're providing volunteer opportunities and doing lots of practical conservation, as well as training on surveying and monitoring of species, which I'll go into a little bit more detail on in a moment. So what have we done so far? Well, during the last year, we've done scrub management in a couple of different areas. We've commissioned the breaking up of scrub from vast tracts and of sort of large monolithic areas of or monocultural areas of stuff like bracken into small little islands with sheltered glades and passages through, which are warmer and more sheltered from the prevailing wind, which means it provides lots of little micro habitats for invertebrates, as well as being able to allow for a lot more space for flowering plants. So there's more food for various pollinators. We've also commissioned a study on the distribution of Goldilocks aster on Durl Head near Berry Head, which has allowed for targeted scrub cutting there to try and increase the population of the Goldilocks aster plant, which is sort of crucial to the life cycle of the Goldilocks aster case bearer moth. So we've sort of taken a very sort of a pinpoint scalpel-like approach in that area. So where we've just got 1 hectare that has been cleared of scrub to allow for the Goldilocks aster in particular to increase its numbers, and then the Goldilocks aster case bearer moth. We've also done arable reversion. So over at Wembury Barton Farm, we've done 12.3 hectares. You'll see in this field here, there's a great big hole there. It's hard to tell, but it's about 2 foot deep. And I dug down there, and after very many years of quite hard farming, this field didn't have a single worm in that hole that's 2 foot deep. So to give you an idea of the soil is quite challenged and perhaps a bit abused. So it's going into arable reversion to species-rich grassland will improve the soil quality, carbon sequestration, and the habitat that will grow on top of it in time will provide a very large area for various invertebrate species. So you can even see from the satellite picture, there's quite a lot of bare ground, and the sward diversity was very, very low. Loads of sort of pioneer species of particularly a lot of typical weeds like thistles, creeping thistle, and so on. So encouraging that to become a species-rich grassland will provide an awful lot more habitat. We've also done donor site creation, and these donor sites are areas of species-rich grassland where we're trying to increase the amount of flowering plants, so much so that they're sort of like quite flat open fields, as you can see. And in these flat open fields, they're very easy to harvest. And that means that in future, once wildflowers have become prolific in the swards here, they can easily be harvested for seed or green hay, which can then be taken to further establish more wildflower habitat throughout South Devon. Because since 1960, 97% of the wildflower-rich grassland in the UK has disappeared, and creating these donor sites will hopefully allow for large areas to be recovered. So another thing we've been doing is grassland restoration. So these are areas that were grassland, but were very low quality swards, typically because they'd been intensively grazed or managed for silage. So the fields in the top left are down next to the coast, and the coastal strip here is priority habitat. It's maritime cliff and slope that's got a wide range of flowering plants and quite a large range of invertebrates as well. But the fields behind are, largely speaking, just a fairly species poor selection of grasses. So by seeding these with yellow rattle, which is a grass parasite that slows down the growth of the grasses, it will allow the wildflowers to become more competitive and to spread up into these fields via natural colonization. The prevailing wind would be coming from the southwest, and it will be able to blow seeds from the coastal strip up into these fields. And once the yellow rattle has grown up in them, it should make it far more easy for the wildflower species to colonize. And there's a little picture here of one of the yellow rattle seedlings coming up this spring. In the bottom right, we have a picture of the salt spreader that was used to spread the yellow rattle seeds in the fields last autumn. Then this field in the bottom left, much the same idea. The bottom, I say the bottom, but the southwest of it is priority habitat lowland meadow. We've seeded the upper areas of it, 4.8 hectares, with yellow rattle, which will allow the huge amount of wildflowers that are inside it to spread up and into the rest of the field. And that will increase the amount of habitat there for pollinators like bees and wasps. Last bit of habitat work here would be the bee banks. So we've had a load of volunteer events to construct bee banks. We've done 6 in Wembury, 1 in Paignton, and John accompanied me the other day to go check out these new bee banks. And just a week after we'd excavated one set of bee banks, we found that they were already in use by ashy mining bees, yellow-legged mining bees, orange-legged furrow bees, painted nomad bees, common furrow bees, and Asphocodes species, which is kind of blood bee. So just by creating this nesting habitat, they've already it's provided areas for these species to be able to breed and increase their populations. So what can you do if you're interested in becoming involved in Lottie? Well, we've got practical volunteering events such as bee banks, scrub clearance, meadow seeding and meadow maintenance, as well as surveys and recording. So we'll have a couple of different surveys throughout the year. We are going to be doing longhorn bee and 6-banded nomad surveys starting from May through to June. We'll be doing rapid grassland assessment, which will include training on how to do rapid grassland assessments. We've already done some oil beetle training and recording, and we'll be doing glowworm recording later on in the year as well. So you can also record things out on your own time. If you happen to be out on the coast path and you spot something interesting, you can whip out your telephone and use an app like iRecord. iRecord's the one we would recommend the most, or iNaturalist, to record these species. And that just means that you can sort of be out and about enjoying the coast, maybe taking the dog for a walk or something on the coast path, and take a photo, and it'll all contribute to the data that can help inform our project, help inform where we do our habitat works and where conservation for certain species can be targeted. So yeah, if you're interested in that, you also feel free to get in contact with me, and we'll be able to give you tips on how to get onto the iRecord. And here, whether you want to take a photo of this or not, there's a quick guide on how to join the iRecord, the Life on the Edge iRecord activity. So you'd first download the app, go through activities. For some reason, it has a glitch where it'll say, sorry, there are no activities. And you have to press a button that says read more. It will give you a green hyperlink that says iRecord activities. It'll take you onto the website where you can choose browse activities, search Life on the Edge, and then there's a yellow star you can press to join. It's quite convoluted, I'm afraid, but if you're interested in joining the activity, feel free to email me and I can send through the list of instructions of how to get on there, and hopefully that'll make it much easier. So yeah, here's my email, Sam Skevington, or samuel.skevington@buglife.org.uk if you'd like to join the iRecord, or if you'd like to volunteer, and I can put you on the volunteer mailing list. So that's that from me. And so now I will stop sharing and introduce, well, it'll be time for you, John. So
yeah, okay. Can you see that or not?
Not just yet.
Okay. Hold on a second.
Well, we had this working 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Oh, share. Here we go. So share, desktop one, share. Okay. So is that working?
Yep.
Okay, good. Everyone can see. Okay, well, thanks for inviting me along, Sam, to talk to you about the bees and a couple of wasps in the Life on the Edge project area. I'm going to give you a general introduction to myself and some of the bees as well, and then take you through the species which have been selected for the Life on the Edge project as target species. And I'll introduce those in amongst some of the other bees and wasps. Okay, so my name's John Walters. Originally I grew up on Hayling Island in Hampshire, and then I came down to live in the West Country to go to Falmouth Art College in the late 1980s. And I ended up working as a graphic designer for Dartmoor National Park for several years. And then I went freelance for the last sort of 25 years or so, doing various wildlife connected work, from artwork to ecological surveys and presentation. I've got a wide interest in natural history. A few examples of things I've studied over the years. So from adders to oil beetles, which Sam mentioned, and things like the possum wasps and long-tailed tits, and some bees. And bees have become quite a major part of my interest in natural history, particularly over the last 10, 15 years. I like to draw and paint in the field. So that's what my main aim in discovering the natural world has really been through drawing and painting over the years. So I like to get out in the field. In this case, this is actually out in Ireland, watching the great yellow bumblebee, which used to occur in Devon many, many years ago, but it's sadly declined. And this bee is a great big, for those who don't know, is a great big bumblebee, and it needs extensive areas of flowers. So in the past, this would have been common across the meadows and fields of Devon, but the state of the changes in farming practice, really, with the reduction in the number of meadows. Obviously, meadows have declined, 90-odd% over the last 50 years. So things like this bee have sadly disappeared, but it does survive in these little fringes up in the Hebrides, and in this case on the northwest coast of Ireland. And more recently, I was out at Prawl Point, actually, in the Lottie area, looking at bees during the recent sunny weather, and taking a sketchbook. And on this area, there's a lot of Alexanders, which were in flower. I could see there were quite a few cliff mining bees, which is a coastal species, and not an uncommon bee on the coast, but it's definitely a nice special bee which you can find and is reasonably common on the coast in South Devon. I've also done quite a bit of artwork for various publications. For those who know Bridget Strawbridge's book, Dancing with Bees, I illustrated that book. Also, as well as drawing, I take a lot of photographs and videos as well. So I use these cameras, which is a Sony RX10 Mark IV bridge camera on the left, and a Canon SX70 bridge camera, and a little pocket camera, an Olympus Tough camera, which is really good for taking close-up shots of insects. And I've also worked on various television programs over the years, and this is one of the bees that's featured in those. This is a little thing called Osmia bicolor. It's also known now as the broomstick bee. It featured in Wild Isles, and this bee is a special little bee. It nests in snail shells, so it will females will select an old disused snail shell, and use that as a nest site. So she'll go inside there, store pollen and nectar for her young, make little cells inside. And then when she's finished the nest, this bee will actually turn the shell over. And it does an amazing thing where, for some reason, it covers the nest up with pieces of grass that actually makes a little wigwam over the shell. It doesn't occur in the Lottie area. I have seen it on the East Devon coast towards Seaton, Lyme Regis Way, on that stretch of undercliff. And these were sketched at Cerne Abbas Giant, which is in Dorset, which is probably the easiest and nearest place to reliably see this bee. There is another shell nesting bee which does occur on the coast here, and that's something called the golden fringe mining bee, and that certainly occurs at places like Bulbury Down and round Prawl Point, and that one will also nest inside a snail shell. My interest in bees, as I mentioned these just a second ago, started really from some work I did for Buglife many years ago on oil beetles. And I was asked to look at the ecology of the British oil beetles. And this, because oil beetles have an association with bees, I'll talk about in a second, I naturally moved on to looking at bees, which I hadn't really done much on before because there was very little information available, very few guides to bees 10, 15 years ago. This fortunately has changed significantly. But oil beetles, for those who don't know, are you might see these, particularly the black oil beetle, if you're out on the coast path at this time of year, or a little bit earlier. They're starting to go over now, but these beetles emerge usually about the middle of February, and then they're active through the springtime, and you can find them wandering across paths quite frequently, and right out in the open as well, because they're called oil beetles because they can produce a toxic oil from their knee joints, and this is very distasteful, and it's actually poisonous really to other animals, and so birds and other creatures will soon get to know to leave these things alone. So they can wander out, and actually quite easy to observe. The females will often be found on paths, and each female can lay up to 40,000 eggs, which is an amazing number even for an insect. Many insects, of course, lay hundreds of eggs. Maybe a butterfly or moth might lay 100, 200 eggs, but these have to lay thousands of eggs because they have a unique life cycle, really, in the fact that the larvae, in the case of the black oil beetles, which you may have seen in recent weeks on the coast, the larvae of those will emerge in a few weeks' time. So usually towards the end of May, early June, the larvae will climb up onto plants, and then they will go onto flowers. And then what they do is they attach themselves to any insects which visit those flowers. And the reason there has to be so many of them, because they have such a risky life history. The ones that survive are those which get onto certain species of solitary bee. And the solitary bees don't like them, and they know they're on them, and they often try and get them off their bodies. So they got to get onto a bee, stay on that bee, and then be carried back to the nest. And then once in the nest, the oil beetle larva will crawl into the nest, and it will feed on that pollen supply in the nest. So it's a kleptoparasite, to give its official name, of solitary bees. So wherever you see things like oil beetles, and also other creatures like insects like bee flies, you know that there's a good population of solitary bees there. But as I'll talk about during the rest of the presentation, solitary bees can be quite elusive things to actually catch up with. But you can tell they're around because of some of these parasites and kleptoparasites. So the bees are in a group with the Aculeate Hymenoptera, which means they're stinging wasps, bees, and ants. So this forms a group. So here we have a little ant carrying an ivy bee up a slope. But these are two of these groups. So there's the ants, the bees, and the solitary wasps as well. So these form the stinging Aculeate Hymenoptera. So this is what the bees sit in. This is another one of my favourites. This is the Heath potter wasp, and some of these bees and wasps have developed amazing nesting strategies. So they incredibly smart little creatures, some of them, and they've evolved various ways of nesting. And this one is one of my favourites because it actually builds these little mud pots. This is on heather on heathland. But I'll be talking about at the end of the talk another wasp, which also is related to this. It doesn't produce such elaborate nests, but it also uses mud during the life cycle. So in the world, there's about 16,000 bees, ranging in size from a little thing that occurs in America called Perdita minima, which is only about 2 millimeters long. And we do have some tiny bees in this country as well, which I'll talk about later on. There's a honeybee for comparison, and the biggest bee is this huge, is a kind of leafcutter bee, and it lives in Southeast Asia. It's an absolute monster thing with these huge jaws. And I think it makes a nest by burrowing into termite mounds. So it needs these huge jaws to enable it to do this. But it's quite an impressive looking creature. We have probably about 280 odd bees. So this is slightly out of date, and it depends on what list you use and what you count as British bees. So about 280 odd species in the UK, and about 190 of these occur in Devon. Devon's got a long history of bee recordings, so there's various people listed here. William Alfred Leach, who was a prominent entomologist in the late 70s to early 1800s. George Bignell, you see a picture there. His collection is still in Plymouth Museum. So if I was being allowed to go and into the vaults of Plymouth Museum, City Museum, and they still have Bignell's collection. So some of his original bees are still in there. And if you haven't been for many years, but you can ask and get permission to go and have a look at these collections, and they're very interesting from a point of view of what occurred in Devon at that time, what he found, and the historic notebooks he's got as well. And then more recently, there's Perkins, two Perkins, father and son, who studied extensively from the Victorian times to the early 1980s. And then around the same sort of time was Malcolm Spooner, who has also done a lot of recording of bees. So if you look in the atlases of bees of the UK, and you look at some of the Devon records, a lot of the more recent ones are from Spooner. He was he surveyed Devon extensively. So quite a few of the records, things like the longhorn bee, which I'll talk about later, were really recorded by Spooner. So as I said, when I started trying to identify bees, it was quite tricky actually, because there were very few guides available. In fact, very little literature at all. But luckily this has changed. So during the course of my early studies on bees, I met Stephen Falk, and he was working on this field guide to bees. And also George Else and Mike Edwards were working on a larger handbook to the British bees as well. So Stephen's book, I'm sure many of you will have, is an excellent book and really good introduction to the bees of the British Isles. And the George Else and Mike Edwards book really has extensive keys and a lot of information on the distribution and ecology of the bees as well. So they're, if you're into bees, these are must-have books. And as well as that, there's two websites which I highly recommend if you're into bees. So one is the Bee Wars, the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society website, and that has information on all the British species. So it's up-to-date information with photographs of all the bees, wasps and ants. So you can get a real overview of all the species from looking at that. And Stephen Falk's got a Flickr collection. So if you look on there, it's easiest just to search for Stephen Falk Flickr collection bees or whatever else. He's got quite extensive collections of flies as well, and various wasps. But if you type in that, you'll find his collections, and then you'll be able to have a look in detail. So he keeps these regularly updated on the bees of the British Isles, and they're very, very useful source of reference. So in the UK, these are all the genera of the British bees, all the subdivisions of the bees that occur. So some of these I'll be talking about during the presentation. I'll just go through some of the main ones. So when I was first getting into bees, the ones you find most of are obviously the bees with the most species. So things like Andrena, the mining bees at the top there, are bees that you will regularly encounter out and about in the countryside. There's 70 odd species, so quite a few of them are common. The cliff mining bee I showed you earlier is one that you can find on the coast here, and I'll be talking about a few of the others which occur in the Lottie area in a minute. But there's many other, as you can see, there's a lot of different sorts of bee. Really, people, when a lot of the members of the general public think of bees as, the honeybee and bumblebees maybe, but there's all these other bees which are solitary bees. So in the case of obviously the honeybee is a social insect, and the bumblebees as well. So they have a queen, and then the queen has workers in the nest. But all the other bees here are all pretty well all social. Some of them have or solitary. I mean, some of them do have a slightly social aspect to their life history. So there's a sort of stage in between solitary and social bees, but all in all, most of them are solitary. So in that case, each female has a separate burrow, and then she'll find this burrow, dig it out in the case of mining bees, and she will provision it herself. So she works solely on herself, by herself, provisioning the nest. And with the solitary bees, rather than the honeybees and bumblebees, which can live for quite a long period of time because they're social insects in a nest, these solitary bees often have quite short flight periods, which also makes them quite tricky to find. So some of the spring mining bees, for instance, just fly for a short period of time during the spring. And some species maybe just have one or two types of flower which they go to, or one family of flowers. So they're all quite. Some of them are quite specialist, so you really got to track them down. Got a few photos just to give you an overview of some of the different groups, some of the ones which I won't be talking about during the presentation. So the honeybee on the top left is the familiar one. I'll be talking about some bumblebees later on. The little furrow bee there, and one of these is a featured species in the Life on the Edge project. Some, as I said, are quite specialist. So the ivy bee, which I'm sure many of you will have seen, it's a species which was discovered new to science in the early 90s in southern Europe, and then it spread northwards. So in the last, and it reached the UK about 20 years ago, and it spread north, and it's got right up to Scotland now. And as its name suggests, it forages on ivy. So the females only collect pollen from ivy blossom. So as this ivy flowers in the autumn, the bees only fly then. So if you go down to Prawle or many places along the coast, particularly, and inland as well, look on the ivy and you'll find these bees. They're little stripy bees, a little bit smaller than a honeybee, and they're adapted to feed on the ivy, and they'll nest in quite large aggregations. What they've done, and they've also become very, very common, and they've built up into huge numbers in some areas. And the reason for this is, as I explained earlier with the oil beetles, there's quite a few nest parasites of bees which occur. Oil beetles, bee flies I mentioned, but also other bees as well. So about a third or a quarter to a third of the bees that I mentioned earlier actually don't collect pollen and nectar themselves, but they're cuckoos in other bees' nests. And I'll show you some examples of those later on. So they're quite interesting bees. They're actually cheap, really, by allowing their host bee to do all the work, collect the food, and then they'll sneak into the nest and lay their eggs, and then their larvae will feed on the pollen supply collected by the bee. So that's the ivy bee. Another really specialist bee is the yellow loosestrife bee, and this one only collects pollen from the yellow loosestrife family. In Devon, it was really rare, but it's turned up at a couple of sites now. So it flies sort of late June into July, and if you go down to Exminster Marshes on the Exe Estuary, just actually where the Topsham ferry goes across, and look on the yellow loosestrife there, you'll find yellow loosestrife bees. They're quite a tiny little bee, and they collect, as well as collecting the pollen, they collect floral oils from the flowers, and they nest in marshy areas. I've never actually managed to find the nest, but they will actually make little waterproof cells because they're nesting in marshy situations. The one in the middle there is one of my favourites, the pantaloon bee. Nests in sandy sites, could potentially occur in the Lottie area, places like Sawmill Cove. I've never actually looked for it there, but it certainly occurs in East Devon, places like Exmouth and Dawlish Warren. And the females have these huge back legs, and they use these to dig holes in quite loose sand. Tiny little bee there, a carpenter bee. That's a very small bee. Again, this bee is actually quite elusive. It will nest in bramble stems, old bramble stems on the ground, and it will chew out the pith of this stem and then make a little nest in there. But it is a very elusive little bee. It has been recorded in Devon, and I expect it's more widespread, but it is at the moment very restricted in its range. In fact, it's probably only one site at Dawlish Warren, which is actually known from in Devon. On the bottom left is a huge bee, which called the violet carpenter bee, Xylocopa. And if you've been onto the continent of France and Spain, during the summer months, you may well have seen these bees. They're actually huge things that look a bit like a dung beetle or something like that when they're flying. Really impressive insects. And these, probably as a result of global warming, are actually moving north. And they have actually turned up and bred in the UK. I had a few years ago, Stephen Carroll and myself saw a nesting, or the remains of a nest, which was actually on an allotment in Exeter. And the bees had nested in some bamboo canes, and we managed to see some of the bees that had been found from there. Red mason bee in the bottom there, that's a sort of bee. If you've got a bee hotel in your garden this time of year, when the sun's shining anyway, they will be starting to fly. So this is one of the regular users of bee hotels. And another little specialist bee there on the left is a chelostoma. It's a tiny, tiny little bee, just a few millimeters long. And that's just, I'll put that in just to show the range of size of our British bees. So the first of the Lottie bees, now this is the water dropwort mining bee, Andrena ampla. Now this one, as its name suggests, is another specialist. It likes to collect pollen, or only collects pollen from water, hemlock water dropwort. So this one is found in places where this plant occurs, and there's also suitable nesting sites. This is one of the sites where it was found by Stephen Falk a few years ago. And Stephen's actually been involved with this bee and actually adding it to the British list, because it's a bee which is called a cryptic species. So it's been in the UK for a long time, but it's only actually recently been found that it's here. And because it was confused with another bee, a broad-faced mining bee, Andrena proxima, which looks very similar to this bee. And originally, all the populations were thought to be this same bee, but now Stephen had a close look at some of the specimens and also had some DNA analysis done, and it was proved that the ones in the southwest that are on the hemlock water dropwort are in fact this Andrena ampla. So this is typical habitat for it. This is an area at Slapton Nature Reserve where the bee occurs. And as you can see, often where you get hemlock water dropwort, there's extensive stands of it. So actually finding the bee can be quite tricky. It flies end of May into June, and it's quite a small bee. It's about half the size of a honeybee. But it's quite a distinctive little bee. So it has a very black, shiny body with these very neat white bands along the side of it. So, and you see it obviously around the food plant. But when Stephen found it, he was actually running a bee course. It would have been about 2018, 2017, 2018. And they walked from the centre and down this path, which is just coming from the Field Study Centre at Slapton down onto the Lee. And along this little track here, this little path there, they found dozens and dozens of these Andrena amplers. Here's one here. So they're obviously nesting in profusion along that stretch. And I went down with Stephen a few days later, and we had a look at them. And there were lots and lots of these bees nesting, obviously in this quite small area. So they were actually quite easy to see then that year. They also have a cuckoo, their own cuckoo bee, which also goes on the broad-faced mining bee, the Andrena proxima. This is a thing called Nomada conjungens, a fringeless nomad bee. And these were quite common at this site and quite easy to see. As you can see, often, in some cases, you could see both of these bees sat in the same place on the leaf. Now, I went down the following year, and I found a few of the nomads and one or two of the Andrenas, but so it's not as easy to see. And then in subsequent years, I've struggled I haven't found any there at all. So we don't know if these species has a sort of boom bust type association with its nomad bee. Little is known, but it seemed to have disappeared for several years. But Kim Lever did find, a friend of mine, Kim Lever, who lives at Black Orton in South Devon, he did find at least one of these Andrena amplers there at Slapton last year. So they are still around, but they don't seem to be in such a profusion at the moment. Other sites where they were seen, I was working with Paddy Saunders, bee recorder for Cornwall, and we did some work on longhorn bees at various places, including Gala Rock. And there were a few Andrena antlers nesting here. But this bee, as I said, it only comes out for a short period of time each year, a few weeks, and it is quite elusive. It's a small bee. There's often extensive areas of its food plant. So you really got to be in the right place at the right time to find it. And also, it does help to catch it. So it's a lot of bees are quite elusive, and they're very sharp-eyed, actually, bees, and very alert. So once you go walk towards the plants, they'll often just drop off or fly away before you actually see them. I quite often, when I'm looking for bees, I use my close focus binoculars and actually scan ahead onto flower heads, and you get a better idea of if bees are feeding there, because as you walk through, particularly when it's warm, as I said, they will disappear. But using a net is really essential for finding many of these bees, actually. And there's Paddy with his net. It's out on Dartmoor, actually, sweeping around various flowers and in locations where you're trying to find the bee and catching it that way. This is the black mining bee. It's another Andrena pilipes. It flies in the springtime and also again in July. So it has two broods. The first one is quite early flying, and it's black. It's obviously adapted to be active during the springtime. It's a beautiful bee, lovely black bee. This was one I saw down at Prawl Point, just below the Coast Guards a couple of weeks ago. And these bees will nest in aggregations, in loose aggregations in the cliff. So they'll actually nest in the cliff alongside things like the cliff mining bee I showed you earlier. It's a nice one because it's actually quite an easy one to identify because it is all black. And there's a male there. That was the female. This is the male. He's a bit slimmer with slightly longer antennae, and he's a small black bee as well. So in some respects, it is quite easy to identify, but in other, there are confusion species as well on the coast as well. So this is that's a black mining bee. That's a sort of typical breeding habitat. So the bees will nest in this small rocky, mud cliff, sort of soft rock cliff habitat, so they can burrow easily into there. And you can see in the background there is a number of these soft rock cliffs. So they nest in there, and then they can fly inland. And they use a variety of different flowers. They're not a specialist bee. So in the springtime, they'll be using blackthorns and any other flowering plants. And then in the summer, maybe using things like brambles. But as I said, there are other black bees on the coast. So in the summer, you get this thing which is called a large shaggy bee, which is also all black. And it's related to, it's a thing called Panurgus, and it's a related family to the Andrenas. So it does look similar. So just to note that there are, when you're identifying bees, it is quite important to either get very close photographs of them or to catch them and have a close look and get to know all the features of them to identify them, because they're not an easy group to do. There are some easy species to identify, but most of them require a bit more examination of the specimen. So this is another one which is on the Lottie list, the carrot mining bee. And as far as I know, this one hasn't been seen for many years. There are records from around Prawl Point, and it's but I haven't seen it there. But I think again, it has quite a short flight period in June and July, and you've got to go out at the right time of year to find this bee. And it's quite a small bee, so it's only about 15 millimeters long, so it's a small little bee, and it again is quite elusive. So it's around often extensive swathes of wild carrot. So you look at the habitat there at Prawl, and you think, well, this bee must surely still be around. But so far I haven't seen it. But then I must say I haven't specifically search for it. And I think with a lot of these bees, you've got to target them really. So you've got to go down there and at what's the optimum time during an optimum spell of weather, and just target looking for that bee. So find big patches of wild carrot and then sweep and catch bees which are on there, and hopefully try and find the species you're after. These were some photos I took in Dorset. I went to, because I hadn't seen the bees, so I went to check out one of the sites. This is at Durlston Head. And there's a little aggregation there of bees. They were nesting on some bare ground. And once I found the site, there were quite a few there, and they were relatively easy to see, which does give me hope that they are around somewhere on the coast here. But it would be a case of targeting the search to try and find where they are. I think often the case is if once you find where they're nesting these bees, then you can find them year after year. But it's actually finding those sites in the first place which can be difficult. This is another one, which is another small bee, quite similar looking. This one prefers hawk bits, hawk's beards, cat's ears, families of those sort of dandelion type flowers, so it prefers those. It's a bit more common. It's not uncommon along the coast, certainly in southwest England. It's been recorded around Prawle, and it flies really May to August. It depends on the site really. I think probably late May, June is probably the time to look for it on the South Devon coast. Again, it's quite a small bee, and you've got to find where it's nesting. So it's a mining bee, so each female will dig a little burrow down into the ground, and then provision those cells, some cells inside there with pollen from hawk's beards during her brief flight period. So some of these bees are only going to be flying for a few weeks in the year. So you've really got to, again, get down at the right time of year and target it, and really look closely to try and find them. This is another one. I haven't actually got a picture of a live one of these. This is an orange-footed furrow bee. The furrow bees are quite a large family of bees. There's quite a number of them, and they are quite a tricky group to identify because many of them are small. You can see down on the right there's one of the smaller ones. This is a tiny little Lasioglossum. That's one actually called Minutissimum. You can see why it's named that. It's a tiny, tiny little bee. So these bees are really species which you really have to catch and in many cases collect and kill the specimens and identify them under the microscope to be absolutely certain of what you've got. And that's just the way it is with these species. Some bees are easy to identify. They're large, and colourful, but others are quite small and very similar looking to their close relatives. These bees are called furrow bees. You can see on the right there. The females have this furrow, which are sort of hairline furrow on the last segment of their abdomen on the upper side, and so this will put it into this family of either Lasioglossum, or there's another family called Halictus, and these are the furrow bees. So from that point of view, it's actually quite easy to determine which family you've got, but actually identifying the bee is usually a little bit tricky. As you can see, most of these bees are like the one on the right, slightly bigger than that, but the orange-footed furrow bee is actually the largest of our furrow bees. So it's it's not as big as a honeybee, but it's a reasonable sized bee. Female is anyway, but still it's quite a scarce bee, quite an elusive thing. I've only ever managed to find a couple along the coast. But again, it's got quite a long flight period, so April to September. But I think again, you need to target areas where it's likely to be. So and also there are other species. So as I said, you're looking for these bees by eye, but really you've got to catch them. So this is quite a common furrow bee called the orange leg furrow bee, which we did find, Sam mentioned, at the bee banks at Barton Farm at Wembury last week. So this one looks similar to the orange, the the Lasiglossum xanthopus, but this one is a commoner species. So as I said, I'm just trying to emphasize the point that some of these are quite tricky to identify. This was the site where I found the xanthopus, the orange hooded pluribee, and this was down at Bolt Tail. And this was a site I was working on Mediterranean oil beetle at this site, and I did find one that was nesting around the area where the oil beetles were found, so it's potentially a host for that. So I mentioned the Recorder sphecodes. This is at Barton Farm the other day, and this is a type of blood bee, and these are all cuckoo bees. This is a family of very similar looking bees. So these ones you absolutely have to collect specimens and examine under the microscope to really be certain about what you found. There's one on the list which is a red-tailed blood bee, Sphecodes rubicundus, which again I haven't seen. This the picture on the top is another species of Sphecodes, and the host of this one is actually a thing called the large meadow mining bee, Andrena labialis, which again has occurred around Prawle in the past, but I haven't seen it myself. And I think again you need to target to see whether this bee is still around to start with, and then try and find out if the Sphecodes is about as well. So it may be that the Sphecodes is found and then we know that the host is about, or vice versa. An easier one now. This is the silvery leafcutter bee. So this one, Megachile leachella. These bees are summer flying. They're leaf cutters, so the females will nest in pre-existing cavities, and they will use leaves. About several sections of leaf will be cut, and they use these to bind them together to make a little nest cell. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. And this bee likes sandy areas, so it's on the list. I haven't actually seen it in the Lottie area, but it is on their list of bees, so I presume it occurs somewhere around the area. But it does like sand banks to nest in. So these were at Exmouth Seafront, where it's quite a common bee there, and you can see them nesting during the summer month. Particularly July is a good month to find it. It likes flowers like rest harrows, is one of its favourites, so that's one way of finding it, but it will also go on brambles and other flowers. It's quite a neat little bee with distinct little stripes on the back, and the feature of these leafcutter bees and related families are the fact that the females will collect the pollen on the underside of their body rather than on the legs. There's a little bit of video of one, and you can see this one's been collecting pollen from bramble, and you can see how they go onto the plant, and you can see the pollen is actually carried in one load all on the underside of her abdomen there. She's buzzing around in the brambles, dislodging the pollen, and then she's collecting a load of that, and then she'll take that back to her nest burrow and then provision that. So there's a number of other leafcutter bees, and some of them are quite similar. There's another one, the coast leafcutter bee, which certainly occurs all around the coast of South Devon, and this one will make a nest in the sandy bank. And just to show you what actually is happening inside the nest, because obviously those ones are nesting in burrows in the ground, so you can't actually see what's happening. This is one in my bee hotel in the garden, and this is a patchwork leafcutter bee, one of the commoner ones which you'll find in gardens and generally through the countryside. This one was actually collecting petals, rose petals, to make its nest. And I've got one of these Nurturing Nature bee hotels, and this allows you to actually view inside. So it gives you another view of the secret life of these bees, really, and see what they're actually doing inside their nests. In this case, this is red mason bee nests, and so you can see these are starting to fly now, and then you can see what the bees are doing. So all the bees do this in some way. So the mining bees will make a little mud cell underground, and they will collect a store of pollen and nectar, and then in each cell, and then lay an egg on that, and then make another cell. In this case, these bees nest in a line, so they'll make a number of different cells together and then seal up the end hole. There's another species. This is another leafcutter bee, Megachile versicolor, which was also nesting in our bee hotel. And there was only one of these nesting, so I was able to actually follow it through. And you can see that the female made 28 provision nests during her life cycle, just a few weeks. So they're very busy little creatures. And you can see this bee has a cuckoo bees which go after it. And so you can see when she's built the nest, you can see in the top line there, after she made all the cells up to 17, and then from the rest of the entrance, she actually just plugged it with leaves. And this is to stop things called sharp-tailed bees, which are the cuckoos of the leafcutter bees, entering the nest and then laying their eggs inside. So these cuckoos they're called sharp-tailed bees because they'll enter the nest of the leafcutter bee. The females will cut a hole inside the little leaf casing cell, lay her egg inside, and then the larva of the sharp-tailed bee will eat the larva of the host bee and all its food. There's one building its nest, so it actually mashes the leaves together, sort of melds them together to make a cell. Fascinating things to watch. They really are. Bees, some of the behavior of bees is really what excites me, and watching things like this is a really amazing thing to see. This is just a little image of the little bit of video of the leafcutter bee, which just shows what they do when they're inside the nest. So the silvery leafcutter bee, I'm sure, will do this as well. And she actually, because she's got the pollen on the underside of her body, she actually holds her body up when she's moving into the burrow. She runs around there. You see her coming in a minute. She's got a pollen load, and she actually holds her abdomen up so that the pollen isn't rubbed off. And then that was a sharp-tailed bee. So that one had snuck into the nest, and then it was checking it out to see if there was any opportunities to lay an egg in there. It's quite nervous looking, that bee, and it has a good reason to be, because if it goes in there and the host bee is there, the host bee has quite a powerful sting, and it will actually can kill the sharp-tailed bee female. So she's gone in there, check it out, but then she makes a quick exit in case the host comes back. This is another cuckoo bee, again, and one I've actually never seen. It's a cuckoo bee of a thing called the wool carder bee, which certainly occurs in the South Devon area. I've never managed to find one of these, and I think the reason for that is they often, some of these cuckoo bees, the best place to find them is around where the host bees are nesting. So this is quite a small bee, small stripy bee, quite dumpy little thing. If you look closely at its body, it's got a lot of pits on its body there, and the reason for this, and it's the same with the sharp-tailed bees, is they have these pitted bodies, and this is sort of like a defense against the stings of the host. So this is sort of like armor plating. What they do if they are cornered by the host, if they're caught in the nest, they actually roll into a ball and actually have so their body is this cuticle is actually quite thick and well protected against the sting of the host bee. So the bee which the Stelis uses is this one, the wool carder bee, which is not an uncommon bee. I get these in my garden. They're quite an interesting bee, and they are a really nice bee because nice one to watch because they've got fascinating behaviour and they're easy to identify. So the males in this case, in most bees, you've seen some of the photos I've shown, you see that the male solitary bees are smaller than the females, and this is generally the case. The males generally don't live for that long. They fly around for a short period of time and mate with the females, and then it's the females who do all the work on their own. So they have a longer life history. But in the case of the wool carder bee, the females are slightly smaller than the males. And the reason for this is they have a different strategy. So this is a female wool carder bee, and there's the male coming up. So what happens is the male will guard a patch of flowers, and he guards this exclusively for the use of the female wool-carder bees. So they come in, they know they can go there. There's a source of pollen and nectar, and it's guarded by this male who chases off any other bees or any other insects which come into that patch of flowers. So the male will mate with any females which come into his patch of flowers, but he will also chase away any other insects. This is a bit of video. This is in our garden on some lamb's ear, which is a cultivated type of woundwort. So these bees do like woundworts. And so this is a bumblebee which has strayed too close to the net, and this thing will quickly get rid of it. It doesn't like anything else. I've seen a video of one chasing a hummingbird hawk moth away from a patch of flowers. So they're very aggressive, tenacious little bees, but fascinating things to watch. The females are called wool-carder bees because they're related to leafcutter bees. They collect the pollen on the underside of their abdomen, so you can see that structural difference. But these ones, instead of collecting sections of leaf, they collect wool from leaf, from the surface of leaves. So naturally, they do this from things like woundworts. But if you grow this plant, lamb's ear, in your garden, this is like a super furry plant, and they absolutely love this. So they'll come in and collect the wool. And then they'll collect little balls of cotton wool, and they take this back to a crevice. I've never actually managed to find where ours nest. They always fly off out into the garden somewhere, maybe up into under a roof tile or in a crevice in a wall, but they'll use a pre-existing crevice. I did see one once in one of the bee hotels like I've got, and you could see it was nesting inside there. I had an opportunity to watch that, but it's usually very difficult. And that's what they like. So they like various sorts of woundwort. And if you grow this, you'll find other bees which are also specialists. That's a little fork-tailed flower bee, which also occurs around woundwort patches. Now looking for this little stelis in South Devon, I think the sort of places you need to target are places where there obviously are wool-carder bees. The place I see the most is when I've been looking for longhorn bees, studying longhorn bees at Gara Rock. This is just by the Gara Rock Hotel, and they planted quite a lot of lamb's ear there. And so there's good numbers of wool-carder bees at this site. But I haven't spent any time looking for their nests. The nests can be quite high up, but this would be the sort of place to look for the stelis bee, the cuckoo of this. That would be the first place I'd try, somewhere like this, or any other places where you've seen the host bee. So this is at Gara Rock in the summer. Quite an easy place to see the wool-carder bees. Now on to another easy one. This is the logo of the Life in the Edge project, the longhorn bee. This is a lovely bee, beautiful little creature, and used to be reasonably widespread in the UK. It has become much more localized in recent years, mainly due to loss of habitat. Very distinctive, particularly the males, with their super long, looks like bits of licorice type long antennae. And this is early in the season, so they fly from end of May right through into July, maybe even into early August some years. So the male has these, I don't know quite why, but it has these incredibly long antennae. That's a mating pair. So you can see the female's much shorter antennae, but still quite a distinctive bee to identify. The best areas for the longhorn bees are around Prawl Point and Gara Rock. There's also a few little, up to the start point as well, and round towards Berry Head as well. There are little pockets of populations of these. I'm not sure of any inland in South Devon, even slightly inland at the moment. So it's possibly something that the Life in the Edge project can encourage by creating those banks and suitable flower sources as well. So maybe encourage these bees to spread a little bit more inland, which will be an exciting thing to see happen. So this is typical habitats. It's down at East Prawl, where they nest in the soft rock cliff. And they like to forage on various clovers and vetches. So tufted vetch is a good one to see them on. And they also like kidney vetch earlier in the season, and everlasting pea as well, which I'll show you in a minute. This is down at Gara Rock, and this is where they nest in the base of the cliff, often in this sort of red clay soil is where they particularly like to be. And early in the season, so from the end of May, early June is a good time to see the patrolling males. And you can often find where the colonies are by looking for these males. That's the easiest way to locate them because the males are quite obvious. They're easy to identify in flight, and you can find them on the flowers, in this case in kidney vetch. And I have seen, several hundred males flying at Gara Rock during the peak season. So at this time, when you have small aggregations of these bees along the coast, it's really useful to try and track them down when the males are flying, because then you can find where the males are buzzing around them. They often fly around the nest site, locate and mark the nest sites, and then go back to look a bit later in the season to find the females. So these are the females at East Prawle. And one of their favourite forage flowers, I know Life on the Edge have been doing some planting of these, is the narrow-leaved everlasting pea. I absolutely love this. See, the female will collect pollen from this particular plant. It's one of their favourites. It must have very high quality pollen. And then they'll fly. And then in these areas where you've seen the males earlier in the year, so you located that, you go back at this time of year and you can find the females bringing back the pollen to their nest sites. And this leads us on to their host, to their cuckoo, which the host is the longhorn bee. And this is the six-banded nomad bee. And this is one of the rarest bees in the UK. It's only found on that stretch of coast at Prawle Point, which I showed you in the photo, a couple of photos back. So it's only been seen there, and it actually hasn't been seen for a few years now, probably since the last 3 or 4 years. There's been surveys for it. I've been involved with those, and Paddy Saunders has as well. He's been working on that last year as well. But we haven't actually managed to see this bee again, which is a bit worrying. We're sort of concerned, but we're hoping that it is still out there somewhere. It just needs more pairs of eyes to try and locate it. The bee is a nomad bee, so on first appearance it looks a bit like a wasp, and it flies like these bees fly like small wasps, buzzing around the nest sites of their hosts, so they can be mistaken for wasps. There's a few other examples of ones that you would find along the coast. These are around Prawle. So this is an orange-horned nomad bee, and that is a cuckoo of things like the black mining bee. So that will go into the nest of those and lay its eggs, and then the larva of this bee will eat the contents of the nest. But they are quite superficially similar. There's another one, the Gooden's nomad bee, Nomada goodeniana. And again, they're usually black and yellow. There are some red ones, but they're black and yellow with various stripes and markings and distinctive features, but you have got to look quite closely at them. Another one, this is the painted nomad bee, which uses the yellow-leg mining bee, which is quite a common nesting bee on the coast. It flies at this time of year and again during the summer. This one just has a one big yellow spot on the back of the thorax there, and quite often the other ones we're looking at have two little smaller yellow spots. So this one is actually reasonably easy to distinguish from the others by that fact. The sixth nomad bee, this is one of the last ones that was seen, actually, from Andrew Whitehouse of Bug Life, took this photo. This is a male. This one has, again, it's quite superficially similar. It has bands, broken bands on certainly the first 2 or 3 bands on the body are broken, yellow bands. But the real distinctive feature is on the female. And again, you've really got to catch these things to look at this closely. But if you look on the face of this bee, the actual face is quite expanded. So it's sticking up there above the jaws. And this is a diagnostic feature of this bee. This is one they've caught. We'll say that some of the bees, as I said, will sting. But other bees won't. So these Nomada bees and the mining bees, they have got stings, but they haven't got any venom. so they might try and sting you, but they won't hurt you. So it is possible, with a bit of knowledge about which ones do what. Leafcutter bees are generally ones which have got stings, which can hurt you, but it's not too bad. It's not like a bee sting, but these ones won't sting. So you can actually hold them or put them in a little glass tube and examine them. But you have got to examine them or photograph them closely to enable you to identify them. And the way I found these bees is by waiting by the nest site. So this is a longhorn bee nest site at East Prawle. They nest again in this reddish clay soil at the base there. It seems to be what they really favour. And the way I found them is just literally waiting by the nest site and waiting for one of these females to appear. And that's when I've been working on it, that's the technique I've used, which, going out early in the year, locating where the males are, finding the nesting aggregations, and then waiting there when the females are nesting and hoping one of these bees will fly in. See, that one there actually has the 2 yellow spots on the back of its thorax, has the lots of broken yellow bands, orange legs, but it's really got to have a good look at the face to be absolutely certain, because there are obviously similar looking nomad bees around. This one, if you look on the back of the thorax, has lots of orange things there, and they're the larvae of the black oil beetle, which have hitched a ride on the back of this nomad bee. Another one on the list is the brown-banded carder bee. Again, one I've seen in North Devon, but not so far on the South Devon coast. It occurs mainly along the North Devon coast. A place like Braunton Burrows is a good place to see it, and around the north coast of Cornwall, generally in dunes and species-rich grassland. There is one record, I think, from a few years ago at East Prawle, I think it was found. So it looks like it may colonise. It's a bee which isn't doing too badly. It has declined, but it seems to be making a little bit of a comeback in recent years. So hopefully it will establish itself on the South Devon coast. Bit of luck. It's quite similar. The thing is, again, with bumblebees, some bumblebees are quite tricky to identify. So this is a common carder bee. So it's related to that, and it's quite well. Sorry, no, that was a no. Sorry, no, go back a bit. So this is a brown-banded carder bee, and they do actually quite like the everlasting peas. So quite a good feature. Quite a way to look for them is actually look on the everlasting peas to see if you can see them. But they do get quite worn. I think bumblebees are out in the sun, so they get bleached and a little bit worn looking. So they can be quite tricky to identify. That's a common carder bee, which is reasonably one of our commonest bumblebees. Goes in all sorts of habitats, and you can certainly find it down on the coast. They're quite variable as well, these things. So if you can find a nice fresh brown-banded carder bee, that's a good way to identify them. But if they're worn, you might have to have a closer look at them, or get a photo or get it examined. Take a good photograph and have a close look at it and see if you can see any of the distinctive features, or catch the bee and take a look at it a bit closely. There's a queen. The queens will fly usually a bit later than some of the other bumblebees, so they'll come out sort of late April into May time. I know some have been seen already this year in the warm spell, so they emerge a bit later than some of the other bumblebees. And when they're fresh, they're actually quite distinctive. You can see they have quite a neat orange pile on the thorax with quite pale edges around the sides, and also on the body. You can see in the middle of the body, just work out and see there under the wings, the brown band. And so if you've got a nice fresh one, they're not too hard to identify. And they do, as I said, they do quite like some of these kidney vetch and everlasting peas. So they're quite attracted to those. It's a good places to look for them. Just finish off with a couple of wasps. So it's spider hunting wasp. Spider hunting wasps, there's quite a few species in the UK, and they all hunt for spiders, as their name suggests. This is a bit of video of one. So you tend to see these, you probably notice them first by seeing a spider being dragged across the ground by this tiny little wasp. What it does is it catches spiders, paralyzes them with its sting, and then it will drag them back to its burrow. And quite often, quite a distance they'll go as well. So 46 species in the UK. Some of them are kleptoparasites of other spider hunting wasps, but most of them are like that one I just showed you, which will go and hunt down its host. And they often use particular species of spider, which each species specializes in. The one on the list that is on the Lottie list is the ridge-saddled spider wasp, Cryptochilus notatus. It's our largest one, so it's about 1 to 1.5 centimeters long. So it's a little bit larger than many of the other species, which is a good distinguishing feature. But these wasps are really, really hard to identify in most of the species. They all look pretty much identical. So to identify them, you really have got to catch them and pin them out. So this one is a photo from Stephen Falk here of one, and this one, it's called the ridgeback because it has these fine lines. You see just under the base of the wing there, it has these fine ridges. So the size of the wasp and the presence of those ridges will determine this species. So from that respect, it's one of the easier ones to identify. But there are a lot of other very similar looking wasps out there, which make the identification process quite difficult. Just finish off with mason wasps. So there's a species called Uodanereus quadrafasciatus, which is on the list, which has been recorded from Prawle. I don't actually know when the record was, and I have looked for it myself, but never actually managed to find this one. So it's related to the potter wasp, the heath potter wasp, which I showed you earlier in the presentation. But this one uses mud for its nest. In terms of this Uodanereus, it nests in large rocks and pebbles on the shore with holes in, so it will actually make a nest inside there using mud. So if you really, the way to find it maybe would be to target looking for any wasp which is doing that in June and July. But as I said, I've looked for it, but still not managed to find it. And the thing with these wasps is similar to the spider hunting wasp. There's a lot of very, very similar species. So this Ankystroceras oviventris, which was at Prawle Point, this one makes mud nests which are actually attached to rocks, so you can actually see the nests. It looks pretty well identical to the Uodanereus. It's a very few little subtle features. So these are basically little black wasps with yellow bands. One you will see on the coast, I'll just finish off with this one, is a little Odonereus. I call them chimney potter wasps. It's called a spiny mason wasp, I think it's official English name. And these ones will nest in areas where there's some water and there's a mud clay cliff, so they'll actually make a burrow into the nest. And as they into the cliff, and as they burrow in, they collect little pellets of mud, and they build these into these little elaborate chimneys over the nest. It's a little drawing just showing you what's happening inside it. So you can see I'm not sure, no one knows really what the function of this tube is, because it does actually get washed off as soon as the rain comes. It's quite fragile, but it's maybe some sort of ventilation system for when they're often nesting in very hot places, so maybe it keeps the nest a little bit cooler. And you can see the nest cells are built inside, just under the surface of the rock, and they're actually provisioned with small weevil larvae. So there's a little weevil larva being carried in. And just finish with a bit of video of one actually coming in. So you can see these aren't uncommon around, particularly around Prawle Point and at Gala Rock. I've seen them as well. And you want to look in areas where there's some water. There's a little stream at Gala, or there's a little pool at Langstone Point at Prawle where I've seen. So I'll finish off with that, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. And if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Very interesting, John. Does that? I mean, I've certainly learned some new things despite having spent months and months and months reading about these species. So, does anybody else have any questions before we wrap it up for the evening?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Hello. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you. Brilliant, brilliant.
That's right.
I don't profess to know a great deal about wasps and bees, so yeah, really interesting. But a basic question, perhaps: what
Yes.
makes a bee, and what makes a wasp a wasp?
So bees are vegetarian, really, so vegan wasps. Bees actually evolved from wasps. They evolved from solitary wasps, but all of the bees are vegan. So they collect pollen pollen and nectar to feed their young. Whereas all wasps, there are the odd exception in the world, but of course, but all wasps are carnivorous. So like the chimney potter wasp I showed you there, they will collect feed on other insects. Usually,
Interesting. Then, thank you. So it's not. There's no real defining physical features.
well, I mean, strictly speaking, bees are a vegan kind of wasp. Yeah, they've been given a set, but they are really in with that group of insects. So they are part of the wasp. Scientifically speaking, taxonomically, they are a group of wasps which are vegan. But they are separate in terms of visually. You know, a lot of them have hairs on their body which are adapted for collecting pollen.
Yeah.
So they have certain features like that, which you've seen through the talk. Yeah, really, they are a type of vegan wasp. It's the best way of answering.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, you've inspired us to pack a few picnics this summer and wander down to Poole Point and Gara Rock. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Well, if there isn't anybody else, effectively, well, thank you very much all for coming. And there will be a sort of follow-up practical event, which you're all welcome to attend on the 1st of June, where we will go down to Poole Point to try and get a look-see at the longhorned bees and any other bees that happen to be there on the day. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And if you keep your eyes on the South Devon National Landscape website, there's also an event page which will show all the up and coming Life on the Edge events that you might want to get involved with. And yeah, if you have any further questions about, for example, the iRecord, or if you'd like to volunteer, please feel free to email me. And you can email me on the email address which was on the presentation earlier. We'll upload this to the YouTube channel in a couple of days' time. So if you can't remember it from back then, it'll be up on YouTube shortly. So thank you very much for all attending tonight. And thank you very much for the very interesting talk, John.
Okay, thanks very much. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, bye then.